Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the webinar this morning on the benefits of flexible working for STEM businesses. My name's Heather Wilson, and I'm from the Equality Commission's Advice and Compliance Division. So before I do the introductions, I just want to run through some of the online protocols, which I'm sure you're all well familiar with by now, but by way of reminder, just to say your mics will be muted, and I'd ask you to turn off your videos, as this will help us with the Wi-Fi. At the end of the session, if you have any questions, you'll need to turn your mic back on, but we also have the option to ask questions using the chat function. So please feel free to post any questions as we go through the session. And we'll pick these up at the end. My colleague Una Wilson will be here to field the questions, and she'll direct them to our speakers this morning. If anybody loses their connection, if you could go back to the email invite and just click join team meeting link. That's the best way to get back in. I'm going to share my screen for the next hour or so, and if I could ask you not to take any photos of the screen, just due to GDPR and needing consent. We are recording the webinar up until the point of questions, which is why we'd like you to turn your cameras off, and we'll be keeping a record of the chat activity, and we'll store this. We'll hope to share the recording with you after the event, and we'll be planning to use it maybe as well in training. So the other thing just to say is you should have received a link to an evaluation form in your joining email, and it should appear as well in the chat function later in the webinar. So I'd be very grateful if you could fill in the evaluation form just before you leave the webinar this morning. So now on to the introductions, and I'm very pleased to have several speakers joining me this morning. I have the Equality Commission's Chief Commissioner, Geraldine McGahey, and I also have two speakers from local company Exploristics. I have Aidan Flynn, who's the Chief Executive of Exploristics, and also Lucy Keeling, who's Exploristics Head of Services. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say about flexible working this morning. In a moment, I'm going to hand over to Geraldine just to start off the session, and then you'll hear from me talking about the business case for flexible working and some of the legal aspects. After that, I'm going to pass on to Aidan, who's going to tell us about how flexible working is happening in Exploristics and the impact that it's having there. And finally, we're going to hear from Lucy, who's used flexible working practices in Exploristics, just to hear about her experience of that. So after all the speakers have finished, we'll have questions, time permitting. I think we've started slightly late, but the plan will be to wrap up at midday. So that's me over with the introductions, and now I'm going to pass you over to Geraldine McGahey. Thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the introduction. Can I just say welcome everybody to this business webinar. I believe it's an important event. But could I just start by thanking Aidan, Lucy and Caroline of Exploristics for writing the employer blog for our website and for the support on social media and a short video. Can I maybe just start by saying a little bit about myself, because I'm sure many of you don't know me from Adam or have just seen a photograph of me or some kind of media article. But my background is actually civil engineering and building management. And I went from being a building control officer into local government and took up the position of Director of Building Services and then Chief Executive before I took early retirement back with the reorganisation of local government. But whenever I started out on my career, when probably many of you weren't even born, it's that long ago, and if you were born, you were still only a baby. But when I went to school, I was in an all-girls school. And we had a careers teacher who spoke to us about a week before we were due to submit our applications for university places. And I remember saying to her that I wanted to do engineering. She said, well, why on earth would you want to do that? I said, well, because I really love doing maths and science subjects, but I don't want to be a teacher and I don't know what else there is. She said, well, teaching is the best option for you and I'll get you some literature. And she never brought me literature and she never spoke to me again. And I went ahead and I did my own thing and I applied to do civil engineering. So I went from an all-girls school into a faculty in Jordanstown where I was the only female. And in fact, I was the first female. So a lot of people would imagine being the only girl that you would be maybe harassed, bullied or whatever. But I have to say that wasn't my experience. I think it was at such an early stage and such a novelty that I was actually protected and mollycoddled, and I was viewed as their wee sister. The lecturers looked upon me as their wee daughter. But having said that, it denied me the same kind of experience as my fellow students were having as they went through their courses, because we had to go to a camp at Dundrum, and it was the civil engineers, and I was one of them. And then there was the builders from the other course, and the two camps were split. So we were put in Nissen huts. I don't know if any of you ever were at Dundrum and know the kind of facility it is. It's Nissen huts that sleep about 30 people. And I was in one of these huts on my own. It was the coldest experience of my life. Next morning, got up for breakfast, and the lecturers came to me and said, "We think you need to go home." I said, "Why? I haven't done anything wrong. Why have I to go home?" "Because we are afraid that we can't protect you." So I was sent home, and I was told, "We'll pass you on this module if you can't find a way to travel every day." So that was my first experience of being treated differently. And I have to say, it wasn't very pleasant. And it made me very suspicious of how I was being marked in my coursework and how I was being treated throughout the rest of the course. But I got there anyway. The bigger problem was when it came to getting a job. What does a wee girl like you think about climbing through dirty warehouses and silo pits? And every conceivable obstacle was put in my way to try to discourage me from having an interest in a particular type of employment. And then a recession hit as well. We were in the middle of a recession. So I ended up working in the housing executive and going out and inspecting properties for grants. And then getting phone calls into the office to my manager to say, "What would a wee girl like that know about replacing windows? She doesn't know." And they wouldn't trust the schedule that I had built up. And it was only whenever my own line managers finally said enough is enough and said, "We trust her." But for those first few weeks, everything I did was questioned. So suspicion always hung over me. And it was a lonely place. There were very few women in that kind of career path. And I have to say, one of my biggest enemies was other women. We were not kind to each other, we didn't support each other, and we didn't give each other a hand up. So if you went into a career where there was a woman above you, you were treated with suspicion by her, and she actually had the potential to really undermine you and pull the ladder from underneath you. So anyway, moving on from that, what you're going to talk about today really is the benefits of flexible working. And I think COVID has brought us a very long way from where we were back in 2018 even. When I was chief executive, and bear in mind I left there in 2015, I had a number of staff who wanted flexible working. And that created a lot of animosity amongst their colleagues who felt that they were shirking their role, that they weren't doing their full workload, they weren't performing, there was no measures for performance. And the amount of suspicion and animosity that would have crept in, to the extent that even councillors would have said, "No, you're not having people working from home because they could be sitting doing A, B and C and we're not getting our money's worth." And I actually remember being on the Nolan show one morning. I was on to talk about graveyards and the fact that people's graves were collapsing. Whenever at the same time there was an article about sickness absence in the public sector. And Stephen Nolan made some comment about these schemes of working from home, was very derogatory about it. And while I'm sitting in the background waiting for an opportunity to speak, I did come in and I said, "Stephen, hold on a minute. You're talking about your listeners." And that was the end of that conversation. I don't think he was ever derogatory about people working from home and flexible working again. But what we've seen over the past 2 years is a real change in mindset. And I think it's to be welcomed, because throughout my entire career, there was always pressure on women to be at work, to do your full job the same as anybody else, to express a need for childcare arrangements or any other commitment it was frowned upon, and it was frowned upon by other women as well, because they felt that you were putting them in a bad light. And I keep telling my husband that's why we only have one child, because I was too career focused and I didn't want to take the time off. But I think what has been demonstrated over the past 2 years is people do their work. They want to be able to contribute in a real meaningful way. And I think the people who are on flexible working actually work harder. I think the boundaries between work time and home time get a little bit blurred. And I think if you have to take an hour out to do some other thing in the house, you make up for that and more at another time. So I think employers benefit greatly from a really motivated staff. But I don't agree that employers should put everybody at home, because there are some of us who need just that little bit of time for human interaction on a face-to-face basis. So it's about striking the balance. But if you can accommodate your employees in a way that meets their needs and makes them feel supported and still valued, I think you have a much higher motivated workforce, a much happier workforce, and people who are more committed to making sure that your business survives. So I think it's really worthwhile to have this conversation now, whenever we're starting to come out of COVID and people are trying to consider, should I go back to work full time? Can I work from home? What arguments can I make for working from home? And more importantly, what can businesses do to support me? So I wish you well in your debates and your conversations this morning. I've had a look at the slides that you're going to see. I think they're very pertinent, and the experiences of people who have used flexible working to get back into the workplace. Because bear in mind, just on the side and not that important, but you know, your pension and your contributions and how you progress up the ladder, your economic viability, etc., all counts whenever you're able to continue working and not be forced to take time out of the workplace because someone doesn't want to accommodate your very important needs that are actually protected by law. So anyway, enjoy your session. I'm afraid I am going to have to go, but my camera will be off, but I'll be in and out. So I will try to listen in, especially when it comes to your discussion later on. So all the very best, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you very much, Geraldine, for sharing your experience with us. And as a person who's worked flexibly for the last 25 years, I do agree that people who work flexibly do work harder, no doubt about that. And thanks as well for wishing us well. And I think we're going to have a good discussion, hopefully, this morning. So over to me now. I'm going to talk to you first of all to look at what impact has the pandemic had on flexible working. Well, Office of National Statistics data from last year shows that the UK had a record-breaking high of 1.1 million job vacancies. And also the pandemic has resulted in more people reevaluating and deciding they want to continue working from home. And there was a survey just there in January that found that more than a third of people want to continue working from home. So what does it mean for the job market? It means that it's one where workers are gaining more power to negotiate flexible working arrangements and benefits. So employers really could find that they need to do more. They need to bring more to the table if they want to be competitive and they want to attract the best pool of candidates. In England and Scotland and Wales, the government's currently consulting on the Flexible Working Bill, and it's set to reshape the way that people work in a post-pandemic world. It's proposing reform to give workers the right to flexible working from the first day of employment, except in exceptional circumstances. And it's going to require employers to offer flexible working arrangements in employment contracts and to advertise the available types of flexible working and vacancy notices as well. So, you know, at the moment, we don't have any legislation like this proposed, but, you know, potentially that could be the direction of travel for the future. So when it comes to young people, employers need to build a pipeline of talent and try to be attractive to young people because flexible working is certainly one of their key concerns. Recent research there by Sonovate, a fintech provider, found that 53% of 18 to 34-year-olds say that they won't be willing to join organisations that are inflexible about the way people choose to work. Also, we know that the pandemic's had an impact on remote and hybrid working, And in some respects, this has been very positive. It's resulted in more diverse workforces by helping more people to join the workforce and accommodating their individual needs, whether these are related to childcare, to disabilities, to mental health. And as well, geographical barriers have been removed. People don't have to be located in particular cities or regions or countries now to be considered for roles. But there is some concern as well that the pandemic can have maybe potentially a negative consequence, particularly for gender equality. The switch to home working or hybrid working could result in more women spending time working from home, whereas men might tend to prioritise working more in the office, spending time there. It really remains to be seen how things pan out. But the worry would be that those who aren't in the office could be less visible and they could be viewed as less committed. Plus, they might not have as good a relationship with managers who ultimately might have the power to promote them, give them pay rises. So organizations are going to have to be careful, going forward, going to have to monitor closely how new working policies are adopted by staff once all the restrictions are lifted. And there's going to need to be encouragement for flexible working across grades and gender so that there isn't a disparity. And finally, although the pandemic has seen a rise in home working, the CIPD reports that there's been a decline in the uptake of part-time working and in the use of all flexible working arrangements. So by embracing flexible workings beyond home working, employers can give opportunity and more choice to everyone. So how can flexible working help in STEM? Well, we know already that Northern Ireland has a STEM skills shortage, and that's set to increase. And to prosper economically, we need more good quality STEM candidates. So to help solve these skills shortages, we need to encourage more women into STEM and to support them to remain in the skills pipeline. So having good terms and conditions and workplace benefits such as flexible working are important factors in helping to achieve this goal. Flexible working as well can help to address an organisation's gender pay gap in that it's a key way for helping women to reconcile their work and their caring responsibilities and helping them to remain in work in roles that reflect their skills. So offering flexible working in senior positions can help women who can't work a standard full-time week to progress, despite them working less hours. And normalising flexible working and using it to attract and retain more women in STEM at all levels in an organisation is going to help to challenge the stereotype of women as carers. It can also enable men to work flexibly and share caring responsibilities more equally, which can support women's progression. And as for diversity, it's well documented by the likes of McKinsey and Co. that diversity at work can make an organisation more effective, more successful, and more profitable. And a gender balanced workforce can increase productivity. Plus, it's important because women make up half the workforce, plus they drive 70 to 80% of consumer spending as well. So there's a number of business benefits for flexible working. Employers who offer it are at an advantage when it comes to attracting and retaining staff. And the CIPD has found that flexible working practices are a key reason for staff at all career stages being satisfied with their work and staying with their employer. Flexibility can reduce staff turnover. It can also support women with caring responsibilities to return to the workplace and to continue their careers. And that can help employers to retain skills and expertise. Flexible working as well can lead to greater motivation and loyalty. Increased employee engagement helps achieve business goals, plus employees have more control over when and how they work. And other benefits include a reduction in sickness absence, improved cost effectiveness, for example, savings on overheads, and improved productivity. And again, according to the CIPD, employees and managers agree that flexible working increases individual performance and it's more motivating than a bonus. And there's benefits, of course, for employees working on a flexible basis. It can help people balance their work with their other life priorities, whether that's caring or managing health conditions, or studying, or possibly pursuing hobbies and interests. And in relation to childcare, Northern Ireland has one of the lowest levels of available childcare, but it's one of the most expensive regions in the UK. And many women have to weigh up if it's worth their while working if there are no options to work flexibly. Carers are also very likely to need to work on a flexible basis. According to the State of Caring in Northern Ireland report by UK Carers, 30% of working carers in Northern Ireland say that if the care services that they used to rely on don't fully return after the pandemic, they'll either need to reduce their working hours or to give up work entirely. And as regards health, according to the Disability Rights UK News, 2 million people aren't in work due to long-term health conditions. So flexible working allows people with disabilities to be able to manage their long-term health conditions, and it can also support mental health and reduce stress as well. For women returners, after a career break, many women find that they're constrained by the lack of opportunities available for higher skilled jobs, and they're often underemployed as they would be willing to work more hours. And research by PwC has found that 70% of women returning on a flexible working basis are less likely to experience occupational downgrading and to end up doing lower skilled work. And this compared with 40% of women who return to full-time work. And of course, as Geraldine mentioned at the start, doing lower skilled work is going to have earnings implications for women in the long term. So this slide, not to go through it in any detail, but just highlights the wide variety of flexible working options that are available, and most people will probably be working under one of these options. In 2021, statistics on flexible working practices in the UK indicated that the top 3 types were flexible working hours, annualised hours, and term time working, and job sharing was the least common type. And then just moving on to look at flexible working and recruitment. And this slide is looking at a report by TimeWise, who are an organisation that are set up to tackle the lack of quality part-time jobs and to drive the flexible working conversation. And TimeWise is urging employers to use flexible working as a tool to help maximise job applications during the current skills shortage. The report is recommending that employers avoid offering flexible working generically and instead look at job design and be clear on which types of flexibility are possible for the role, whether that's part-time, home working, flexible hours, to consider this at the point of identifying a vacancy. The report found that only 1 in 4 jobs are actually advertised with flexible working, which when you turn it on its head, it means that people who really need flexibility can't apply for 3 in 4 jobs. The report also recommends that employers should clarify hybrid working patterns for new office workers. Only 8% of jobs they found mention home working, and this is information candidates need to know because those are the jobs that they're going to prioritise. Part-time working is the preferred working pattern for 20% of UK employees, but it's only on offer in 10% of job ads. Meanwhile, flexible hours is even more overlooked, and it's actually only offered in 3% of job ads. So this next slide is looking at what can employers do to try and embed a flexible working culture in their organisation. So firstly, it's looking at developing a proactive strategy. So flexible working should be on offer to all staff, and an organisation should really start by looking at where is it now, where does it want to go, and how is it going to get there. Leadership, of course, is very important. Positive behaviour from the top down can help to create change that influences the culture. If leaders role model and actively promote and support flexible working practices, this sends a strong message to all employees. And as with all policies, the flexible working policy needs to be communicated to everyone. Staff need to understand how it works. And also managers need to receive training if flexible working is going to be effective. They need to be upskilled in job design, and they need to have the confidence to discuss flexible working arrangements with staff if they're going to balance the needs of the service with those of the employees. Introducing flexible working ambassadors, sharing case studies, success stories, maybe building a staff network and encouraging its members to act as mentors for staff starting out on flexible working. These are all examples of how you can promote positive attitudes within the organisation. And of course, you need to evaluate how things are going. This is going to require looking at information sources such as workforce data, retention figures, flexible working uptake, staff surveys, exit interviews, maybe having focus groups with staff. If there's a clear focus on evaluation, it's going to help to communicate successes within the organisation. So just to highlight flexible working in relation to the legal situation. One of the main areas here is where flexible working has equality implications would be in this case for women under the sex discrimination legislation, and usually it links into indirect sex discrimination. So just to clarify, indirect sex or discrimination involves applying a provision, criterion or practice, a PCP for short. So even though this is applied to everyone, it has the effect of disadvantaging those who belong to a particular group. So just for example, a policy of rejecting all requests for flexible working could be indirect sex discrimination because it's more likely to unfairly disadvantage women than men on the basis that women still assume the bulk of family caring responsibilities. And therefore, they're more likely to request flexible working arrangements than male employees. But if flexible working arrangements were to be provided only to women and not to men, then that would be a danger of direct sex discrimination against men. So any restrictions that an employer applies, any PCPs, have to be objectively justified by the employer if they're refusing flexible working. So there's a test, an objective justification legal test, which really is about balancing the needs of the business against the needs of the employee. And if a complaint situation were to arise, a tribunal would be looking at this closely. They would be listening to an employer's reasons, and they would be critically evaluating those reasons for applying a PCP to see if they are justifiable and what the employer has been doing in relation to this. There are some other aspects of anti-discrimination legislation where equality has implications for flexible working. We have the Disability Discrimination Act. So working on a flexible basis can help people with disabilities to better manage their health conditions. And under the legislation, of course, employers have to make reasonable adjustments for disabled employees and job applicants. And examples of that could be changing places of work or altering the hours of worker training, allowing time off for medical treatment, assessment or rehabilitation. Also, we've got the Fair Employment and Treatment Order, and this is linked into flexible working for people whose religious belief oblige them not to work on certain days or at certain times of the day. So there's a potential here for indirect discrimination, and again, that has to be objectively justified. And the same under the Race Relations Order, potential there for a complaint of indirect discrimination on grounds of race that would have to be objectively justified as well. There are some other employment laws relevant to flexible working. I'm not going to spend any time on them today, but we have the shops and Sunday trading legislation, and then also Article 112 F and G of the Employment Rights Order, which deals with the right to request flexible working arrangements for employees who have more than 26 weeks continuous service. And there's a detailed procedure involved there, and you can find out more about that procedure and how to handle it in the Commission's model flexible working policy. So just to highlight, the Commission has got some guidance there to help support employers. There's a section, the pink one there is the section from the Commission's website on flexible working, and it has links to some of the model policy that I mentioned, and also flexible working guidance. And we also have an employer training program that usually has a flexible working session, which looks at the issue in more detail as well, and you can find out information on those. So just really to finish off with the Commission's guidance and to summarise what it's saying as regards flexible working, it recommends that employers should take 6 steps, starting with having an equal opportunities policy, which I'm sure many of you already have in place. The second step is to adopt a flexible working policy and procedure, and this is to help manage requests for flexible working and to encourage employees to consider making requests. And having a policy like this will help to ensure that all flexible working requests are considered fairly, and it will help an employer reduce exposure to any complaints along the line as well. Step 3, as with all policies, is to make sure people know about them. So make sure that it's communicated to all staff. And step 4, we've touched on as well, managers and decision makers need to understand their legal responsibilities and their own responsibilities under the policy, especially when they're considering requests. Step 5, we've touched on as well, is looking at recruitment and selection and considering if you can actually advertise a job on a flexible basis at the outset. And step 6, to periodically review the policy to see how is it working, and at least once every 3 years would be recommended for that. The guidance as well has tips to follow when considering requests of flexible working. There's no exhaustive list given of reasons to refuse flexible working, and the message is very clear. Every request for flexible working needs to be considered carefully, and the aims and the needs of the business need to be balanced with the needs of the employee. So that's a kind of quick look at some of the key issues in relation to flexible working and the legal perspective. And I'm now delighted to hand over to Aidan to hear more about what Exploristics is doing in relation to flexible working, and to hear how some of those points which I've mentioned are actually working in practice within Exploristics. So Aidan, thank you very much. It's over to you now. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. And would you believe that Teams has just decided to play up for me? So I can't see the slides, but I'm hopeful that others can. I do have my own slides, so I can just run through them.
Yes, Aidan, well, I can see them at this end, so I'm hopeful that everybody else can too.
If we get out of sync, Heather, just let me know, and I can readjust. So hello everyone. It's great to get the opportunity to come and talk to you all today. Thanks for turning up to listen. I'm Aidan Flynn. I'm the founder and CEO of Exploristics. I'm a statistician. I've been working in the pharmaceutical industry for almost 30 years now, and I set up Exploristics in Belfast almost 13 years ago. So what I just want to cover is some of our experiences around how flexible working has helped to attract and retain staff. So next slide, please, Heather. I just want to start by making a bit of an admission. I have not experienced any of the things that Geraldine referenced earlier or described earlier. I have been incredibly fortunate. I've gone through my entire life without any impediments or barriers that have impacted on the decisions that I wanted to make. And, you know, I'd obviously heard about some of the things that other people have experienced, but I don't know what it feels like because I haven't experienced it. So my understanding and awareness of some of the issues was quite high level. And I couldn't put my finger on what were the underlying causes. So, you know, I didn't see myself as part of the problem, and I wasn't really sure what someone like me could do about it. The other thing I'm pretty sure about is I think there are lots of people just like me. I know lots of my male friends who would listen to Geraldine's story and be shocked by it. That doesn't mean we haven't seen it or witnessed it, but you know, shocked by the fact that that might still happen in the modern world. And I think it's fair to say that we're not really sure what we can do about it. The point I want to make is I think there are lots of allies out there who can really help to drive issues around diversity and discrimination and flexible working. I think is one part of that. Next slide, please, Heather. So a little bit about us. We provide biostatistics and mathematical modeling expertise to the pharmaceutical industry. So we help companies with their clinical trial design, and we then analyze all of the clinical data once it is available. And at the end, we tell pharmaceutical or biotech companies whether their drug or their device or their diagnostic test, whether it works or not. Next slide, please, Heather. So a little bit about the pharmaceutical industry. This is a big industry. In 2020, it had global sales of around $1.3 trillion. It is an unusual industry in that it invests heavily in research and development. I think it's higher than any other industry. The people within pharmaceuticals, they tend to be highly skilled graduate and post-level positions with a high focus on STEM subjects. It's a complex industry where you're constantly learning, you're constantly developing, and training is an important part of every role. It takes a long time to develop core skills, so there's a big investment in that training of people. Traditionally, it's also been an industry that has attracted lots of women. There's a figure I got, around 65% of the workforce. This is broadly within healthcare, are women. But it also suffers from very similar issues as other industries, in that at the higher levels of organization, there is an underrepresentation of women. So around just 1 in 4 of leadership positions are held by women, despite the fact that more than half of the workforce are female. So next slide. So I just want to give a bit of background into sort of what drove some of the decision making at Exploristics. Firstly, the market opportunity is huge, and it is increasing all the time. You know, there's a big demand for the types of skills that we offer. There's increasing regulation in clinical trials. There's an explosion of the different types of data that are collected in clinical trials. So that has led to a big increase in demand for our services. But against that, recruitment and retention is really challenging. The kind of skills that we look out for are highly sought after in lots of other industries. So recruitment is very difficult, and you know, salaries are being pushed up very rapidly. So you know, we get people who are called and offered salaries that are very high, and you know, obviously it's tempting to consider those. So as an SME, it's very difficult to really compete with some of those large companies or brands. You know, I think maybe as a graduate, and I think of the likes of Google or Amazon or Microsoft, and going into an office with a table tennis table or a pool table or something like that. You know, maybe that's what they think the workplace is like. that's not what we offer. That's not what we do. We need to work harder to raise our brand awareness, particularly to graduates. So there's a big gap between the market opportunity and our ability to deliver the services. So a few years ago, we started to ask the question, how do we really, as an SME, how can we attract and retain the best talent? So next slide, please, Heather. Well, the first thing I did was think about lots of people that I've worked with, over at that point, almost 20 years working in pharmaceuticals. And I thought of some of the very talented people that I'd worked with, some people that I'd love to work with again, but I'd sort of lost touch with them. And, having access to social media and things like LinkedIn, I could reach out to them. So I had numerous conversations with former colleagues, and some general themes emerged, such as some were looking for more flexible working, predominantly arranged around childcare, and they found it very difficult to find that. Some had taken a career break, to raise a young family. They wanted to return to work, but they couldn't find a role that, had the required flexibility that they needed. And whilst it's fair to say that those conversations and those issues affected mostly women that I talked to, some men were included too. So, this idea of flexible working affects all of us. And just bear in mind that these are people who had many years experience within pharma. They were highly skilled. They'd done all the training. They could make an incredible contribution, but they were excluded from the workforce. And that just seemed crazy to me. So before COVID ever hit, we started to look at, well, how do we enable, people like this to get back into the workplace? So we moved from a rigid template of employment contracts and working practices to a much more flexible approach. And I use the word template very deliberately. As any founder of a company, when you're trying to set something up, you just need to get something in place. So, you use whatever templates you have access to, and you then implement it without really thinking too much about it. But over time, it becomes embedded. You become, further distance from really how that's affecting people. And those who do understand are not in a position to change it or to make decisions about it. So, I think quite often we get caught in just an embedded way of working, and one that was never done that way by design. So we offered a lot more flexibility through working from home, part-time contracts, things like compressed hours, flexible hours, looking at additional leave around school holidays. And it's one thing kind of saying you're going to do all these things, but I think you have to back it up by additional support. So you need to have all of the processes and infrastructure in place. So we needed to have a server where people could log into remotely from home, and that was a secure portal. We needed ways to ensure we knew where people were and what their working patterns were as well. We looked at career and professional development, and we kind of separated that out from performance issues. We believe that if there are any performance issues, they should be dealt with in real time there and then. You shouldn't wait 3 months for your next appraisal meeting before that gets raised. But those career and professional development meetings, we have them more routinely, but they're focused on the employee. They're focused on what their aspirations are. They're focused on what opportunities there will be within Exploristics, and then we try to align the two. And the other thing we've done is we offer a lot more mentoring. So as an example, we hired a non-exec person a woman onto the board, and she's very experienced in our industry, and she's now working with some of our leaders in the company to to mentor them. I think it's fair to say that men and women have a very different approach to new job opportunities. If men can do half of what's listed on a, or even 10% of what's listed on a job description, they'll throw their hat in the ring. Women maybe switch that, and if they can't do everything, they might avoid it. So this mentoring approach allows us to overcome some of those barriers. Next slide, please, Heather. So we did this a few years ago, and there's been some significant impact on the business. So right now, 46% of staff are women. When we started this, it was 48%. So we're maintaining that high level of women in the company. 33% of the board, non-executive directors, are women. We didn't have any going back a few years. When we look at our senior leadership team, so these are people who report directly to me, 43% are women compared to a quarter a few years ago. At the next level down, it's all women. I think in the last week that's just changed. So we do have a man now in one of those positions, but we're beginning to see that move through different levels of the company. Everyone can request flexible working, and I think what this has done is it's brought a much stronger culture to the business. We have a shared set of values. There's a lot more trust, so there's much less of an us and them type mentality. It's much more of a partnership. There's much more kind of togetherness. Before we implemented some of these changes, we were growing consistently 20 to 25% a year in terms of revenue. Since then, in 2020, we grew 30%. In the current year, which will finish in March, we are in line to grow 46%. And, we're forecast 80% growth next financial year. We've got a lot more knowledge transfer. When you're working more flexibly, I think people need to be conscious of that everybody knows what they need to know. And let me give you an example. We had one of my senior team went on maternity leave back at the end of August. Throughout August, she spent her time doing handover notes and essentially transferring all her knowledge to everybody else in the company. Women are used to doing this, men less so, and that comes to the detriment of women. But now that we have a lot more flexible working, everybody's doing it more and more. We think about flexible working as moving from a fixed type of working pattern to flexible, but it also works in reverse. We have examples where we've offered flexible working at a time when an employee needs it, but once that is over, they have also requested to go back to a more fixed working pattern. So that works as well. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to just pick up the pace a bit. People are choosing us over other companies. We're winning the right business due to a cultural alignment. And let me give you an example here. We did a pitch to a US company a few months ago. During that pitch, one of that company said, "We want you to be at our beck and call at any time of day or night." And we back out of that because that's not the kind of company that we want to work with. They don't share our values. So, we are winning the right type of business. And because we had all of this in place, the the transition through COVID was pretty seamless. We had all the infrastructure in place. Everyone immediately, within a day, started to work from home, and it was seamless. And actually, we've continued to grow the business. I want to make sure I give Lucy some time here. So we have a staff survey. We do it every year. I've put some results in there which just illustrate the kind of values, the partnership, the togetherness that I think everyone in the company feels. I won't go through that. I'll let you read those in your own time. So I'll hand over to Lucy.
Thanks, Aidan. So hi, everyone. So I'm Lucy Keeling, and I'm the Head of Statistical Services at Exploristics. And I just wanted to talk to you today about my personal story and what flexible working has meant to me. So I studied to become a medical statistician, and I worked for many years in the pharmaceutical industry. In 2008, just 22 months after having my first child, we had twins. And I have to say, this is truly amazing, but having 3 children under the age of 2 is can certainly be a challenge. And it was in this moment that I just knew I wasn't going to be able to go back to work. So time moved on. We moved back to the UK, and before I knew it, 7 years had gone by. And I started to think, what can I do next? And I even started to think, maybe I need a career change. What other careers could fit not better around a busy family life? So I started doing some courses at night school, and another 2 years went by. So I'd now been out of the pharmaceutical industry for 9 years, and I thought, I really need to make a decision. So I started looking at advertisements for medical statisticians. Next slide, please, Heather. And I found lots of advertisements for medical statisticians, and there were quite a few that said they offered flexible working. But I sort of thought, what does flexible working really mean? So I applied for some of these positions, and I did a series of first interviews over the telephone. And it became clear that flexible working did mean different things to different companies. So to some companies, you might be able to work 80% instead of 100%. Other companies might offer that you could work from home 1 or 2 days a week. And it also became clear that there was very different attitudes and responses to me and having taken this career break. So some of these calls were really quite negative about it. And other calls, I spoke with women who said to me, yeah, I did exactly the same thing. You will be fine. So after a few of these calls, I spoke with Exploristics, and at the end of the interview, Exploristics told me that they already had people working in their company who worked part-time. They worked fully remote, so completely from home, and they worked flexible working patterns, so sort of hours that suited them around their sort of home life. And they even said there was the option that you could take extra time off in the school holidays if that was what you required. And I thought, well, this almost sounds a little bit too good to be true. So I thought, well, let's try. Let's go back to my career and we'll see what happens. So next slide, please, Heather. So what has flexible working meant to me? Well, it meant that I returned to my career after a career break, and there was honestly a time when I was never really sure that would ever happen. And I've maintained a really good work-life balance, and I've been able to work around the demands of a really large, busy family. And what it's actually meant is that I've been at Exploristics 3.5 years now, and it's meant that I've actually increased my hours. So I now work full time. And I've also been able to sort of increase work through roles of increasing responsibility to where I am now. So I now volunteer as a STEM ambassador, and part of that work, I support ideas that promote more women, more females into the STEM careers, and also try and promote ways that can keep women in their careers. Thank you. I'll pass back to you, Aidan. Next slide, please, Heather.
Thanks, Lucy. And I am conscious of time, so I'll just pull out some key points from this slide. There's quite a lot of text on it. I mean, we've made a lot of good progress with regards to offering flexible working, but we believe the job is not done. We have a lot more to do. It's not just valued by women. In fact, all of our other employees, want to work more flexibly and share some caregiving responsibilities. We think there are some areas that really need to change. There's clearly a disparity around parental leave that's offered to mothers and fathers at the key stage of their career. There is no choice really. It's really up to the mothers to kind of take time off. And I think in the modern world that shouldn't be the case. We should have much more equality in terms of the kind of support financially that is offered to people who are taking parental leave. Yeah, we would like to offer that. We would like to offer that kind of equality, but then it really comes down to us as a small company to try and finance it, and that's tough. You need to make sure that you can support it as a business, and small companies in particular would find that very difficult. I think to drive change, we need to engage a much broader range of people, so not just those who are affected by discrimination or inequality. We need to kind of mobilize those allies like me who have gone through life without really experiencing directly discrimination or inequality. So I'm going to just stop there and open it up to questions, but thanks to all for listening.
Thank you very much, Aidan, and thanks as well to Lucy for your input this morning. I'm not going to go through that, but just to say there's support from the Commission as well there, which you're probably familiar with, but you can contact us if you have any questions or queries related to flexible working or to any other area of equality as well.